Today, Monday, our second hour, we're talking about AI and how it's changing everything. We're going to do some brainstorming about how AI might continue to affect the future of, well, pretty much everything in production. I'm going to kind of open things up by tossing it to Ryan Raderman, who's here on the panel, is going to be talking a little bit about the show framing, and then we'll have an open discussion about everything. So, Ryan, what are you thinking?
Morning, Bill. We're definitely really excited. I think this was Alex's idea, supported by some others, to do the Summer of AI. You know, on Mondays, we've looked at a couple different like multi-week or multi-month segments where we've kind of done a series. So we did a project management and resource management series where we talked about bidding, for example. And so, you know, kind of on a once-a-month basis, we had a Monday blocked off to talk about one of those topics, and we had kind of a group that would gather to do so. Well, for this summer, because of kind of the increasing demand from this community, from the producers around Gen AI oriented topics, the way Gen AI is affecting content creation, the way Gen AI is affecting business, we've really decided to set aside kind of an 8-week kind of end-to-end every single Monday series. And so today we definitely want to get input from the group as well as potentially answer some questions folks have on Gen AI topics. So I've got a little bit of a list, and I'll get to that list at some point over the course of the day today on topics that I've got, but we've already got a pretty rich list of suggestions and topics from folks. And so a couple that I haven't seen yet, but we'll throw out there as a little bit of red meat on the table, includes RAG. Somebody did mention RAG, but there's definitely a lot to that topic, and we could probably do a couple different episodes on it. And humanoid robots, I haven't seen anybody mention yet, but my personal kind of a understanding and belief is that we're not far from Gen AI and kind of the LLMs really positively affecting the pace of progress as it relates to how we interact with humanoids from a watch and learn technology perspective and kind of an error handling perspective with what they're working on. And so I'm sure Alex and others have a bit to add, but maybe Bill, you can throw it to Courtney as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Courtney's going to step in here, and then we're going to go right to Alex after that. Courtney, dive in.
Yeah, and cleaning up my shelf yesterday, I found this magazine, which is interesting. So a second hour on the history of AI. This is Interface Age, and the titled story there is on artificial intelligence and robot vocal interfaces. And the date on this magazine is April 1979. So it'd be nice to do a second hour on basically the birth of the concept of AI. It goes way back. And the history of AI and how it's evolved and how it's way different today than it was back in the 70s. So that would be an interesting topic or progress, a thing to discuss, Kurzweil's writings and some of the other Alan Kay and some of the other
watch a little
pioneers.
bit of Metropolis and some of those early shows, speculating it'd be fun. Anyway, Alex, you had a bunch of things to say.
Well, I think that, we might have to extend the summer a little bit. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see how people show up and whether they're active and so on and so forth. But I think that there's so much that's going on right now, and I think that it behooves us to make sure that we're continuing to cover this. We're going to cover it intensely over the next 8 weeks or so. And then after that, we'll probably do it pretty regularly. And we've done it fairly regularly on the way, but I think that we need to focus on this because I think that it affects all of our businesses. And so we need to understand how we're going to ride the wave as opposed to being crushed by it. So I think that it is important for us to kind of figure out where the top of that wave is and what is our set, And so I think that it's important. I love the idea that Courtney had about the history of it. I know when I was in the early 90s, I was working in an A Life company. I think they stopped calling it A Life because they didn't. It is what we think of as AI now, but they distinguished it from the AI of the day because the AI of the day was really algorithms. It wasn't really an A Life was there to talk about the fact that it was learning and changing and doing what it was doing. That's what I worked on. I didn't work on the A Life part. I worked on the characters and giving them the movement and everything else, the bone structure, so that the A Life could take it over. And it was a little frightening. We joked that when I first saw it, the moment I saw the A Life, I was terrified. It was like, and it was just a dot moving around. But what it did was like, oh, and then so I've had the opportunity to think about it for a little while. like eventually this is coming, but I think that talking about it, and there's different columns of us to think about it. We've been trying to think of that you have the stuff that we do with ChatGPT. I mentioned how I was using it in a mundane way, but I think about things all the time, just asking ChatGPT, and I've now customized learning, customized acquisition. But then we also have video. How does it affect video? How does it affect stills? How does it affect audio? These are all things that are picking up and keeping track of the legal ones. And I think that we need to keep track of the risks of AI as well as the opportunities that are there. But I think that it's super important. So but what we're really interested in as we do it is for you to throw your ideas into here. This is, we've got a bunch of our own ideas that we're going to build on, but we'll start. I think that maybe that history one, if we can pull it together, talking about it next week might be the first one, just to give us that process. But we really want everybody's ideas here of what they want to see us talk about.
It'd be interesting to look back at all the futurists, because we've had movies like that who predicted what the future would be like, and see if you can pick nuggets out of there where these things actually came true, these things were way off the mark. That'd be fun to look back at both magazines and movies and everything else. Ryan, you had some more input.
When it comes to the history and the future of generative AI's kind of impact on life, it's really a story of AI winters, right? The concepts were there. A lot of the tech was there. What was missing was the investment. There is a herd mentality with venture capital, and venture capital didn't exist to the degree it does now in the late 70s and early 80s. But, there's essentially crypto was something that was sucking the air out of AI for a period of time when that was particularly hot. And so what is unknown right now is whether it's going to be an overinvestment in Gen AI that leads to some, returns not materializing, to a pullback in investments that'll lead to the next AI winter. It could be a global macroeconomic challenge, or it could be some other technology element that's competing for risk capital, that's competing for venture capital that causes the next AI winter. But in the conversation circles I'm in, it's a matter of when, not if, another AI winter materializes between now and us getting to all of the things that we're so sure are going to materialize with the fullness of time.
Interesting. There's so much possibility. I was reading this morning, I think Rick Beato, the YouTube guy who does tons of music things, did a really interesting one about 5 days ago about talking about when it gets really easy to create content, what does that mean? And it's getting easier and easier. And he had a lot of interesting examples about it. There's pluses, but there's also tons of back-end minuses. And we're all going to have to struggle with these things, however it works out. It's a fascinating topic for discussion. Alex, you had another thought?
Yeah, and when you talk about I watched that Rick Beato video, and Rick's great. So everybody should watch all the things that Rick does. The one thing I did think about that, we tend to lean against is and I think that we want to talk about with AI, is that in the 80s, the synths and the samplers and everything else gave birth to hip hop and gave birth to rap and everything else, because people didn't have to know how to play those instruments, because they were in environments that didn't give you the opportunity to do that. And they were able to express their ideas, and they were able to express what things meant to them without being encumbered by thousands of hours that they didn't have access to. And so I think that when we look at AI, we want to look at also the opportunities that people who don't necessarily have those skills, and I think that the skills are amazing. I watched a 16-year-old play a saxophone last week that I'm still thinking about. Like, he was just, I'm not even a sax person, and I was like, oh, I just can't wait to see where he goes. But that there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of rehearsal to get to a point where that saxophone is like part of your body. And I think that takes time, but I think that, and many of the skills that are being, pushed up took thousands of hours to get there, and I think that, so we have to be careful of that. But I also think that there's so many people with ideas. They have ideas of things that they want to do. They have ideas of things they want to bring to the world, that AI is going to allow them to bring those ideas much faster than, and I always feel like when people are afraid of or excited about AI, they're either people with ideas that want to express them that don't have the skills, or those people that are excited about AI. People who have the skills and then are paid to do those things feel more threatened by it, and so it just depends on where you are in that spectrum.
Let's see. Excuse me, I have the wrong screen up here, and it's
Courtney
looking
had something
over
else to say there.
Courtney.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Courtney.
I was just going to, Alex covered a lot of it there, is how the technology advance, AI's technology advance has caused a paradigm shift in the democratization of creativity. And that the same way that small light video cameras was the democratization of filmmaking and video creation and podcasting, AI is causing a similar paradigm shift in the democratization of creativity, so that someone who has no painting skills can create beautiful artwork using AI. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is to be determined. But how the AI tools, open up creativity for generally for people who may not have those creative genes in their body.
Interesting. We've got a bunch of questions coming in, so more discussion to come. Let's dive into our first one.
Emily Russo, Nashville, Tennessee asks, AI has some time-saving features, but mostly I use it to help me edit writing. I do like using custom bots, but how will we get over the LLM hype and get actually useful AI? Is it RAG?
Ryan Raderman?
I think RAG definitely is a really important step in this development, but really there's a broader term with RAG called grounding, and I think this is probably a thing that we should dedicate one of our early episodes to. So when we talk about hallucination, there's a lot of complaining and frustration about the hallucination tendencies of the LLMs. And I heard somebody smart articulate that hallucinations are a feature in LLMs, not a bug, in that like literally what they do is kind of go retrieve things that they've been trained on and things that you've grounded them in, and then kind of string that together, but do so by generating essentially filler words in between, things by kind of predicting the next token. And so while it can be frustrating that it can so confidently state something that is essentially untrue, we need to appreciate this as a part of the evolution of these LLMs, is that hallucination is actually a critical functionality. But to the degree that we can further ground it in structured data, structured databases, or unstructured data like PDFs, chats, emails, images, anything else we have that can be useful to the context of the use case that we're trying to drive. And if we're talking about writing, in this case, it might just be understand my style, make this thing that I'm trying to draft sound like me, or understand a little bit more about the context of the client or the organization that I'm working on behalf of. Those are topics that are definitely going to facilitate an entire hour for us, I believe.
I was today years old when I heard about RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So I'm not really that familiar with it. Can somebody give me an idea?
That'll be the second hour.
Right. Okay.
We'll never get through this hour if we actually explain the things.
Copy that.
But I do think it really does speak to the power of that we want to, as we go into this 8 weeks, we really want to think about making sure that we define all these things. So RAG and, prompt theory and structured data and all these other things, because they are very different. We think of everything as ChatGPT, but like I have seen some stuff where they take volumes and volumes of work and they just apply a large language model to just that volume of work. Now you're interrogating it. Then you can ask a natural question. What does this mean? And it just gives you the answer. And then it gives you all the references. Like, it says that these are all the places you can read further. And from a research perspective, it's explosive, and I think that those are the kind of things that we want to think about, is how, how can it be used? I use it every day, both to think, to learn, I don't use it on final output. And I think that'll be interesting for us to look at, is I think talking, and I think that maybe I think that maybe there's talking about the history and then defining all these things and talking about where we use it. I think there's a bunch of introductory things that we may do, in the first little bit to kind of set the stage.
Perfect. Let's dive into our next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, Battle of the Large Language Models. Bring on guests from 3 major LLM makers, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, to talk about why their LLM works the way it does and their advantages and disadvantages.
Ryan, do you think we can get around non-disclosures and get that to happen?
I do think it's a little optimistic to think that we're going to get somebody on from each of these players, but remember we did something like this pertinent to, spreadsheets. We did something with kind of an Excel versus sheets versus, whatever else was kind of in the mix there, Airtable. And so I think we can definitely get members of our community who are most familiar. I mean, somebody in the last week on office hours brought up Claude and some features there that were more interesting and effective than those in ChatGPT. And I kind of didn't believe them and spent $20 the other night just to kind of disprove that person. And I was so wrong. I mean, Claude has some unbelievable capabilities that ChatGPT does not. And I found myself, in one of those holy cow moments again with Gen AI that I've had 5 or 6 or 7 times over the course of the past 18 months. And I would love to get some folks that can expose some of those things that are right there because this stuff moves so fast, right? I mean, in the last 4 or 6 weeks, some of these capabilities might have been launched on these platforms that we haven't all heard about yet.
Very exciting. Courtney.
Yeah, even if we can't attract, some high-end players from each of those platforms, we could just do our own head-to-head shootout with, using the same prompts, 3 different panelists, each one running a different version of a LLM would paste that prompt in, and we could judge them head-to-head for speed and accuracy and whether the results were true or not, and how fast they arrived at that. And then we could even add, besides OpenAI, Google and Anthropic, do Perplexity, or the ones that use a combination of those different LLMs to arrive at an answer in a head-to-head shootout for timing and accuracy would be really interesting.
Alexander.
Yeah, more along the lines of what Courtney's saying. I think it's more realistic for us to do our own shootouts. But I think also it would be interesting to have, if we could have one person representing each one who's maybe very experienced so they can further talk about that particular service as well.
Oh, cool. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Ryan Thomason in Houston, Texas. Keeping up with text-to-video models like Sora and Runway's Gen 3 and others, staying up to speed on how they fit into the workflows.
Well, it takes a village, I think, to keep up to speed with all of these, as we're finding out today, because even people who are spending a lot of their intellectual capital on trying to keep track of this, it is such a fast-moving target that I'm pretty excited about the potentials here for Mondays coming up. I know I was thinking that most of the time I try to take Monday off to give my wife a little extra help around, but I may come every Monday just because I'm as interested in learning this as everybody else. So I think we probably have a great audience who's interested in trying to keep up as much as is humanly possible with this stuff. Courtney, your thoughts?
Yeah, and also to talk about, both of these, a lot of these breakthrough video, text-to-video generators haven't really been released yet. We've seen samples of them, what they can do, what they'll be able to do, but they haven't been released because of the guardrails need to be carefully constructed and their fear of releasing them to the general public. So we could talk about guardrails and the necessity, and will these tools ever be released because it's like the atom bomb, they could be used for bad, and how do we limit their use for bad in such a way that we can still use them for useful things, the peaceful use of AI versus the evil use of it.
So much to consider. Let's go to the next question.
Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts asks, live demos of our favorite time-saving AI uses. Each demo would be under a minute to show the context, the previous process without, and then the process with the tool.
Ryan, think that's feasible?
Well, especially if Craig were to join us for one of these episodes, I think that would be super feasible. We kind of did that thing, and Craig. He was a part of it with Excel. And so would love to essentially elicit anybody that'll join us. The Monday Council is something that is hosted directly after Monday's show. And between that and the Saturday volunteer meetings, those are kind of 2 paths into the input planning here. Otherwise, you could always ping Josh or me or Liberty in Discord to volunteer to participate, because that's something that will take a little bit of an army, and I'd love to see that happen.
It's almost as if every one of our day themes could do how's AI doing in this vertical, because it's really affecting everything around us. Let's go on to the next question.
Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina asks, we should have Daniel from Fabric on to talk about his incredible open source prompt templates.
Ryan Rademan, do you know of Daniel?
Prompt engineering is definitely an under-discussed, underrated topic. It kind of surprises me that more YouTubers, for example, aren't all over this. There was something called the Synapse, or Professor Synapse, and everybody should look that up on YouTube. Essentially, between your custom instructions and the ability to kind of create a GPT today, you can essentially give it some direction that. And my favorite example here, and one that we could spend an hour on specifically with prompt engineering and prompt techniques, is asking ChatGPT to ask you clarifying questions, and specifically asking it to do it one at a time. Sometimes it'll ask me 10 questions, then I kind of select a few to respond to. But if I just say, ask me one at a time, and just assume until I tell you to stop, I want you to keep asking questions, that's actually the main way that I use it today. Another thing that I do today is basically tell it, just be a good listener. Just respond, got it. And at a certain point, I'm going to ask you to summarize everything we've put together. Those are the things that I learned from prompt engineers and prompt templates. And I'm certain that across our community, there are many others that have really good examples that could be helpful to all of us.
Let's go to the next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, what personality should AI mimic? ChatGPT says it will be in a naturalistic voice like Scarlett Johansson in the 2013 movie Her, July 1st, New York Times.
That's been the subject of some immediate discussion since that was a lawsuit that, or at least a concern Miss Johansson had against the use of her. Alex, thoughts?
I think that in general, talking about voice simulation would be really, really interesting, because I think that, I think that it's a great subject to think about. We're training voices, training 11 labs and so on and so forth to do fixes. So we take someone's voice, we get them to read some stuff, and it just means I can fix a word that got popped out or dropped out or something like that. And so there's the customization of it. I mean, there's the general, but I think that this whole kerfuffle over Scarlett Johansson, which is much more complicated, by the way, than it sounds, because the person that they said sounded like her just sounds like her and was recorded before they talked to her about it. It's so it's a much more complicated solution there. But what I think is going to happen is people are going to, and we can talk about this, I think people are going to customize everything so it sounds the way they want. It sounds like their brother, their dad, their grandfather, their whatever, their kids, whatever they want it to sound like, it's not going to matter. But I think that talking about what it takes, I think there's a whole second hour of how that voice simulation works. How good is it? How effective is it? Where it's going? So I think that when we're thinking about second hours, we're not answering the question here today, of course. We're just talking about second hours. But as we brainstorm towards that, I think that talking about the technology and where it's going with that and brainstorming around that, I think is pretty exciting.
Courtney, your thoughts?
Yeah, along those lines, like a personality dial and how personality can be implemented in AI voice. How much is too much personality, and do you have a knob that goes from Ben Stein to Scarlett Johansson? And also the effect of these artificial intelligence personalities on our own human personalities, and whether or not we tire of them easily, or they create schisms in our own personality by listening to like a bubbly personality for an AI assistant can wear on you and can cause mental anguish perhaps sometimes. So the personal effects or the psychological effect of an artificial personality on real humans. That'd be a good second.
Ryan?
I'm sure many have seen OpenAI's most recent event that they did on the new ChatGPT 4.0 model and the voice model, and the way you can have a conversation with it that can both sense your tone of voice, but also you can kind of give it some guidance on that. So of course you can do fun stuff to have it actually sound like a pirate, but you can also ask it to whisper or speak more gently or more empathetically or speak in other languages, which it can actually already do the other language part. But the point is, this whole different voices concept is something that today you've kind of got these discrete inputs in, and in the short order, you're going to be able to just essentially speak to it around those little dials that you were speaking to, Courtney. And so it's possible, and they're talking about that already being available to us before the summer is over, that new voice model. So we might just get to do some live demonstration with it by the time that episode comes around.
Alex?
I think that also, I mean, probably, I don't even know if it's the same episode, but I think talking about just its impact on how we think about voices, using spoken word and so on and so forth. So I know that Bill does a lot of books and everything else. And what I look at is I still think that the upper end of that still needs to be a human being. I think there's just an interpretation, a life experience that a human being brings to it. But I also look at all the magazine articles. I listen to magazines. I don't read them anymore. And I just generally am listening to magazines all the time. I listen through a thing called News Over Audio. And it's all people, but I don't need it to be. Like this is a good example. I'm acquiring information at a break. I'm listening at 1.8, so I barely understand what they sound like. Like it's just information, that I'm getting, because it's not even the person that wrote it. So I think that, and I look at how much knowledge is bottled up in text. When you think about all these magazines coming out and not being able to listen to them, and all these old books, like there's an example of biography, Africa Biography of a Continent, which is one of my favorite books, but I only read it once because it's like 700 pages long, and it's great, and I would probably listen to that once a year if it was, but it's not in audiobooks. You know why? Because it'd be really expensive to record, and they're not sure how many people would listen to it. But I would love for someone to take that book and just put it into an LLM, and I'm very close to paying someone to do it. just scan the book and then drop it into an LLM and have it produce one just so I can have it. So I think that those kinds of things are going to happen. So talking about the impact of those things on not only the people who are doing it, but also on the distribution of knowledge, because it really changes what's available to everyone when it's not caught up in, text is a highly efficient compression technology that takes a lot of encoding and decoding to do it well.
Just a couple of thoughts, because I have been working on audiobooks. One of the most interesting things to me is I will do the same type of read on a variety of auditions, and I often get back one author saying, can you do that with more personality? It seems a little flat to me. And then the same voice and the same approach I used, another one would go, can you really dial that down to almost nothing? I'm getting I think there's too much interpretation there. And it's the weirdest thing that two people will take the same thing and have entirely different reactions to it. So I'm always thinking to myself, what's the right way to approach things? Do I move myself to the middle? Or do I try to get a sense for this piece of content that how much characterization, how much dynamic range, and what does the market want? And I'm always in the back of my mind is this little niggling fear about the idea of, is it going to make me do everything in the middle? Am I going to be afraid to go too far one way or the other because everything that the AI kind of thing wants is right here, that will not offend anybody? And if it doesn't offend anybody, is it too mediocre? These are questions that I ask myself as a narrator all the time, and it's really an interesting process as they train all these large language models and get more vocal synthesis done. Where does it end up? How much variation is allowed, and how much variation do you move out of it by doing the algorithmic thing over and over again? It's just interesting. There's just fascinating topics about this. So moving on, next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, I've used Claude a lot to aid planning and brainstorming, and one barrier that can affect one's workflow with any LLM is the usage limit. Do you think that we'll see said limits to be a thing of the past as CPU, GPU power on the desktop increases?
Ryan, what do you think?
There's no question that is going to have a positive impact. And so perhaps the second hour topic here is bottlenecks and limits and scaling laws. That's something you'll hear any of the leaders of the key LLM, like foundation model publishers, talking a lot about is exactly what these limits are, both on the training side and on the inference side. Now, there's the topic that we can even break it out further into things where we're doing inference in the cloud versus inference locally. I think small language models are becoming almost as interesting as large language models because there's privacy implications that are beneficial, and there's kind of speed and user experience implications that are beneficial if we're not calling an API that lives on the other side of, the internet, but rather calling something that lives on device. So you've got both kind of the actual processor horsepower in the cloud or on your device, that's a limitation, but then you've also just got the fact that you pay only $20 a month for ChatGPT or for Claude. And so last night I got going on a tear with Claude, and at a certain point it said, "You're done until 1 a.m. And I was grateful because I should probably, be wrapping up my experimentation there. But in that case, it was less about, they're actually at capacity limits and more like, hey, dude, you pay us $20 a month. You can't sit here and run this model, all night.
Courtney.
Yeah, another consideration we could talk about is the addiction level, that legislators are now talking about limiting social media because of its addictive level, and how will once we have LLMs or artificial intelligence available in our phones or built into our desktop, we'll have enough memory and enough processing power to handle it locally, where there aren't going to be limits on to how long we can use it. Will it become an addictive item like a drug? So that would be an interesting aspect of how it's going to affect, AI will affect society in the addiction form.
Let's go to the next question.
Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts asks, what to expect from AI impact over the next year? What workflows and problems are ripe for change sooner versus later?
Ryan, you want to address this?
Certainly kind of a now, next, later format is something that I'd advocate for and that I think we'll put in the list, right? I mean, talking about the things that we are going to see this year is important, but I don't think it hurts. And I know there's at least one other question about this, for us to be looking a little bit further out to make sure that we're positioned around it appropriately. I mean, I am in an industry that is absolutely going to be disrupted by Gen AI. And so for us as a community or as individuals to be, trying to suppress conversation that is a little bit speculative and that is starting to kind of think about what is the second and third and fourth order effects of the advances is somewhat detrimental to our livelihood. We need to be thinking a couple steps ahead here. We need to be thinking in advance about how the things that come next affect the thing that comes after that.
Looking at the horizon, always used to remember teaching my son how to drive, and it was the process of you're looking now at this light, and maybe you're looking at the next one, but are you looking at the one down 2 or 3 from that if you can see them? And that traffic you're going to be in a period of time, so take the long view. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada asks, considering that most of the generative AI conversation is about unreleased features, how will panelists have meaningful conversation that is deeper than speculation?
Ryan?
We got ahead of ourselves on the last question. It's kind of what I was what I was addressing is just the importance, I think, of looking to steps ahead. A perfect example is a conference that I was at for Boomi. Boomi is an integration platform as a service. And so there's a tool called LangChain that doesn't work well at all. But I should restate that I had a serious struggle with because of my, kind of technical abilities. And I got a little bit of help trying to do some experimentation with that. But I fell flat on my face because of just how challenging it was to interact with that tool set. But having done so already in January and kind of struggled through a few things there, and then letting a couple months elapse when I was at this conference for Boomi and brought up my experience there, a number of people kind of came to my aid with a newer set of tooling that is enterprise supported by an SLA instead of an open source tool set. And I managed to get a ton of value out of that by just experimenting early with essentially technology that wasn't ready for prime time.
Our next suggestion.
Rick Markley in Wisconsin asks, I'd like some second hours on AI 3D generators, example, LUMA Genie, Meshy, etc.
You're not going to get them from me, but I think this is an excellent, of course, we're not answering questions today. We are just speculating. It's an interesting topic. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is going to be huge. Like, I feel like we're right at the very beginning, and there's a handful of these examples that we've seen in Blender. We've seen a little bit in Cinema 4D, but we're going to see other ones that are out there as well, where you can, there's a couple different pieces of that. One is just the ability to have it build things for you that are like, take these 6 models and give me an array of these that are randomly disposed over this space, and it just goes blah, and it just gives you the project that here it all is, and that takes time, and now it doesn't, and so being able to ask in natural language things to do in the app. But I think that the other thing is, make me a chair. There's incredible amounts of detail that it's figuring out for the 2D images. And there's going to be a point where it becomes the 3D images. And I think keeping track of that is really important. Like what's going to happen there is going to be really, really interesting.
Courtney?
Yeah, the combination of AI, 3D model generation, and 3D printing. So the combination of those two things, and how far away are we from the replicator of Star Trek, where we just request something and it may take an hour or two, but it builds it. And the real product comes out of a 3D of a 3D object comes out of a 3D printer. So the combination of AI generating 3D models and printing them.
I always thought that would be a good use for the empty mall space out there. Put in a big 3D printing system, and you could order your spatulas and kitchenware from a pattern online there and pick it up after you finish doing whatever you're doing at the mall, and assuming people continue to go to them. Next question.
This one's for me. How AI machine learning neural networks are being incorporated into dedicated processors and how that will affect future camera technology in production.
Another interesting suggestion. There's so much. So great job. And we're going to continue to take these in for the rest of the hour. So if you have any ideas about AI brainstorming, what you'd like to see us cover on the show, continue to put them in. Alex, did you have a thought about this one?
Yeah, I think that really talking about, because I think there's a couple things there. One is the processors that are being built for this specifically, and Apple has been quietly building these neural processors into their devices for the last 5 years. But also, energy and how it impacts it. There's going to be a lot of being able to spread this out, and I think that also, there's a lot of. It will be interesting. I think that there's paying attention to, like, for instance, what Apple's doing with what they have. They have the ability now to error correct in a way that no one else has right now, which is that they're using the LLMs on the outer edge to make sure that they're scalable. But you want to look at how they're going to probably build in the device and in their own cloud, vetted information that is in there that's probably more accurate and more private. And I think that understanding those models, Apple's not going to be the only one that does that. So I think that understanding those models is going to be really interesting.
I'd love to know a little bit more about what their neural engine, that's their branding, has been for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm still veiled from what that is different than the CPU, GPU. It's doing something.
I think that'd be a good second hour.
Yeah, I think it'd be fascinating. All right, next suggestion.
Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts asks, how about avoiding AI misuse and mistakes? How to guard against you or a teammate relying on AI when they shouldn't, how to catch errors and hallucinations.
Yeah, the safety aspects of everything, even in the small scale, not necessarily big. Ryan, talk about it.
It's a hot topic because just last week, Ilya, who was one of the board members and founders of OpenAI, founded SSI, which is Super Safe Intelligence, I think is the name of that new organization. And so they're very focused as kind of a spinoff of OpenAI on safety over progress as kind of a top priority. Anthropic talks a lot about their constitutional AI and safety being a top priority. But then there's, of course, too, just this concept of trying to ensure that hallucinations are kept to a minimum and truthfulness and grounding is maximized. And there, OpenAI talked just last week about a special GPT-4 model that they developed that essentially all of the responses get run through. It's like, I think it's called GPT-4 Critic, right? So it produces the response and then it sends through this final model, what's wrong with this and what should I not say because it might not be perfectly truthful or effectively cited in terms of its source. And that's something Microsoft's been doing for a long time too. They call it a toxicity filter. So there you're going to be using it in a professional context. We want this thing to not swear and, have extra guardrails. And so rather than building it into the model itself, that chain of multi-shot prompts that get fired after you put the initial prompt in or something, I think we could spend a lot of time digging into.
Courtney Gooden?
Yeah, and to look in that second hour, to look at the fear of misuse as hampering the development of AI, just like when they discovered, when we came out with digital recording, all the recording RAAA, fought against it tooth and nail, and it hampered the industry for the longest period of time because of their fear of them losing income, and how AI affects the economy, and the fear of its misuse could hamper its development to a point that it becomes sidelined for us not being able to solve the misuse problem.
So many questions. I was thinking just the other day, there must be qualities like Mr. Rogers' voice that resonates with so many people, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if somebody takes some of those and puts it into, whether it's sales ads or political ads or whatever, just to resonate with people who have an emotional attachment to a sound, and suddenly being able to manipulate that would be a odd manipulation, but we're headed direction where that should be relatively simple. That's kind of sad. Next question. A fascinating topic, by the way.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida asks, is there an AI aggregator, a single interface where I can see the responses from several models for the same inquiry?
Ryan?
You brought up LangChain as a tool that allows for essentially a model to select from multiple models that it has access to. I know too that Hugging Face has a ranking, and there is we'll surface it by the time we get to that topic on another show, but definitely there are some tools out there. I mean, even Perplexity allows you to put multiple keys in, across your different foundation models. So this definitely exists, and it might be useful for us to do in that Bake Off Live.
Alex?
Yeah, and really exploring the concept of federated AI. That's what you're really talking about here is federated AI, and how, Zoom's using that, Perplexity uses that, other ones, but understanding how that of using, all of those AIs to try to find a better, cleaner answer. And if there's any kind of issue with one or the other, being able to jump from one to the next if one of them fails or implodes or explodes or whatever.
Let's look at the next suggestion.
Emily Russo in Maban, North Carolina, local AI chipsets that are being built into Intel processors and Apple, etc.
Ryan, we touched on that.
Yeah, the two sides to this coin to me are both reducing the size of the model and the efficiency of the model, as well as the underlying chip's horsepower to do inference. It seems to me that as much as we are going to probably get into an arms race around inference and compute power being local again, which is a big shift, right? I mean, over the last decade, I've been moving clients, for example, to thin clients locally on their, sitting there on their desktop, assuming that they can use an Azure virtual desktop and have a pretty equivalent experience. And, lo and behold, the Apple silicon arises, and all of a sudden it's hot to have a lot of horsepower right there on your desk and potentially have these LLMs installed locally. So I think there's a lot to that topic.
Let's go to our next suggestion.
Ryan Thomason in Houston, Texas asks, how about the major vendors how they're showing or shoving AI into their specific products, Ross, Matrox, Sony, etc.?
You're seeing a lot of now with AI. Ryan?
It's not just even the AV space that, of course, we're seeing AI infused into everything. I work in construction technology, and I work in, with the Salesforce ecosystem and NetSuite and Sage, and those applications are all rapidly previewing their chatbot technology, but also the utility AI concepts. And I mean, we saw last week Apple, or a couple weeks ago with iOS 18 on the Mail app, for example, instead of just showing the first two lines of the email, it shows you a limit of 60 characters, but an AI generated summary, and that's already affecting the way we're thinking about Salesforce and what those configurations might look like. So certainly everybody's adaptations and leverage of the technology is a good topic for us to dig into, in addition to how we can build with it from scratch, quote unquote.
Courtney?
Yeah, or maybe an hour on how to determine marketing hype from reality, because everybody's putting, as you say, AI, now with AI on their products, just like when digital came around, the new digital, hammer, the new digital hammer, you hold it with your hand. but how to separate the hype to tell if there's any improvement over the previous product by adding AI, and whether it's just marketing hype or if it's actually a useful tool.
I got to tell you, I had banged my foot through the screen door carrying something, and so I went online to Amazon to repair the screen. So I was ordering some screen, and the next thing you know, I'm watching an AI-generated chat below my order, giving me the pluses and minuses of particular products and things like that. And I just thought it has gone so far. There's so many uses that are just transparent, and if you didn't know that it was just generating a synthesis of all the comments and presenting them to you in a way, I wouldn't have known that was AI at all. It's just crazy how much it's out there. Let's go to the next question, our next suggestion.
Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts asks how we approach exploring AI features without losing too much productivity time, scheduled playtime, AI courses daily, weekly.
Ryan?
Certainly can be accused sometimes of getting into a mode where productivity is lost because of a degree of exploration here. But also, YouTube is something that you can always kind of, especially if you pay for premium, do a download on and just throw in your ear while you're multitasking to learn about how others are using it. So between that and trying to, the way Alex talks about just keeping it up on your screen and by default running it through, kind of as a part of your thought process and your workflow every day is something where I'm pretty confident that most people end up getting more out of it than they kind of end up donating to the cause of learning and exploration.
Alex?
And I think that this is what we're hoping to do with this week. This session is that we will waste a bunch of time, figuring these things out and try to condense some of that for you so that it shortens the amount of time to experimentation, and I think there's still a lot to experiment with, but hopefully we can give you some tips and some real practical ways to use AI. Like one of the things I had a friend that just wrote a 50-some page business plan, and he said, you just use ChatGPT for big chunks of it. Didn't have it write everything. Didn't say, make me the business plan, but added pieces of it. And I started doing some competitive analysis for something I was working on, and it was like, it brought up so many things that I hadn't thought of. Like, and I'll say, well, how much do people charge for this, and how much should I charge for it, and what are the markets for this, and what are the possible ways? And as a brainstorming thing, it was just really powerful. So I think that one of the things we do want to do is definitely make sure that what we're talking about is not esoteric. Some of the stuff might be a little esoteric of what might be possible, but really, here are some practical uses for AI that you can use today, and we'll hopefully be able to get you excited about that.
Courtney?
Yeah, it would be interesting also to learn about the impact of AI on education. There's a lot of lip service now about the fear of students using it in schools to cheat, in other words. But will AI then just take over education, and you'll just have your edubot there teaching your kids, or will it evolve to the point that you don't need to educate society because they have access to this artificial intelligence that can answer all their questions without having to maintain a broad level of knowledge in your own head? So how will it affect education? What kind of tools are going to be used to educate society? And how will that impact future children as to their learning ability?
Alex, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I mean, I do think looking at how it affects education, I think that's probably just a discussion on its own. I really agree with Courtney there that, because I think that there's so many opportunities, whether it's just-in-time learning that I think is really interesting. Like, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about this. I think there's a contextual component that only humans can give right now that I think is important to, and really there's a responsive component to that process. But I also think that students, I know, my kids have been pretty careful. I don't know for sure, but I don't think they're using it for any of their homework assignments. But I do know that they use it constantly to learn, like for things outside of school. They're constantly, on ChatGPT asking it things, and on YouTube asking for things, and asking, and figuring things out. And I can say that the experience that I just had, that I talked about in the first hour, where I had Resolve opened, and I said, "Tell me how to do this," and it told me. I mean, it was turn on resolve, go to the Fairlight page, go up to the menu, go down to this, select buses, and it was perfect. And the fact that it gave me a step-by-step of how to do something that was in an app was kind of mind. Now, of course, it did also try to tell me how to do AES on us. You get to see where this is where it breaks down. I asked it how to do AES on a Scorpio, and it firmly told me how to do something in a menu that doesn't exist. like it said, go to here and select AES. And I'm like, I can't select AES in there. And it said, go to here. And I can't do that. And so, and the only way that I trumped the AI by just pinging Mickey. So it's like, Mickey, where's this button? And Mickey was like, no, just do this. Just do this and this. I couldn't find it on the web. I couldn't Google it on the web. I couldn't find it in the manual. Couldn't find it in ChatGPT, but I found it in the ultimate resource for audio, Mickey. so anyway, so I got sorted that out.
So much. Let's go to the next suggestion.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada asks, topic idea, other types of AI that are not LLMs, or at least not chatbots, and how they are useful today in real-world scenarios.
Ryan, your thoughts?
The other obvious side of that coin is diffusion models, right? So there's LLMs and there's diffusion models. And I posted a link to a tweet by Elon Musk that said, who are you voting for president in 2032, Transformers or diffusion models? And Transformers got 74% of the vote. So people believe they're going to be more useful for us. But what very few have experimented with yet is a combination between those two. We've got multimodal, right? So vision in, whether that's stills or video in, and then we've got audio in or audio out and text out. But between multimodal and between the merging of those two kind of emerging capabilities, that's some of the reasons I think folks are optimistic that we're in the very early innings of what this helps us do.
I will say, out of the last 5 audiobooks I've read, 2 of them had gone wrong AI bots as villains. So who knows? Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, I would love to have Michael Cioni back to discuss more about utility AI, or just discuss utility AI as it applies to media production.
Michael's always welcome here. He's so much fun to talk to, and I'm sure we can get him back in at another point. He's very, very busy with his new startup and things like that, but thanks for the suggestion, and certainly something that we can dive into. Let's go to the next question, our next suggestion.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, discuss YIP, transform text into multiple choice, true or false, or fill in the blank quizzes automatically with our AI-powered question generator.
I'm not surprised that somebody has kind of coded something like this, because I know from every educator that I've talked to, the process of having to build quizzes and tests and things like that is something that they don't often relish. I'm sure some do, but I can see that as being a really good use for this kind of thing. It's kind of algorithmic to a certain degree. So good suggestion, Paul. We'll put it in the list and move on to the next suggestion.
Rick Markley in Wisconsin asks, I'd like to do a second hour on LTX Studio.
Okay, I have not heard of that. I don't see anybody raising a hand here. So
we discussed that in the past, and we'd love to have Rick on to talk about that. Yeah,
okay,
we'd love to have LTX Studio, but Rick can come on and show it as well.
Rick, great to have you on. So
yeah,
you're on the list now. Let's go to our next suggestion.
Emily Russo in Mabay, North Carolina. I think a show on how to protect IP when using AI would be important for this community.
Oh, that's a big subject. Let's start with Alex and then go to Ryan right after that. Alex.
Yeah, there's probably another subject there about the value of IP. Like it's whether, there's a protecting your IP, but the overall existential question is IP in itself going to be that important as we move forward? So we just don't know. IP became a religion over the last 100 years, but it wasn't before that. It was, and it may not be after that. We have to look at, there's a lot of things that, we've made that, but I don't know. I'm not clear because right now information itself is going to start moving so quickly. I'm not sure how important a lot of IP is going to be on as we move forward. So that'll be, but I think that's the larger question there.
Ryan?
Maybe the extension of this topic is less about IP and more about privacy. There was obviously a pretty big backlash a couple of weeks ago when it came to recall, which is to say, if we're not thoughtful about what it is we're capturing in the first place, how we're storing it at rest, how we're storing it as it's transported, and where we're feeding this from a training perspective, we just, may see stuff that's particularly sensitive being moved up and through these models' training sets. And we don't yet know exactly how well that's going to be able to be queried in the future. We know today that people have found ways to basically get the training data to be spit right back out by the model. And so if we're not careful, we could see that kind of being fed out by the model.
Alex?
And I do think that this, what Apple's doing with the private cloud, could be really interesting as it applies to a lot of these things when it comes to privacy. So it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, sandboxing on device as opposed to going
or even on the cloud where they don't have the keys, they don't have the information, they don't have, there's a bunch of things about that are interesting.
Yeah, a lot of discussion there. So great suggestion, Emily. We will put it on the list and move on to our next suggestion.
Douglas Carmichael asks, I remember the story of a session drummer who was concerned about his job in the 1980s, and the advice he got was, get a LinnDrum. Learn how to program it. Will we see more scenarios like that with AI?
Alex?
Watch the Rick Beato video.
Absolutely.
I think Bill was raising his hand to them. It was such a great illustration of when you take out the character of the drummer, how much of a difference it makes, and you can hear it. It's just precision is not the only answer. There is a feel to it and it's so, there's this imperfection. And again, I wish I could post this thing. I saw it was a live stream. My daughter went to Berkeley School of Music for a 1-week thing. And so they were doing a live stream and I'm watching the saxophone player, and it's the style that made it work. He's very accurate as well. But there's a style to it, and I don't know. I think that will take much longer. There's something about all that being generated that I think is going to be very different. So anyway, and maybe it can match a style, but I feel like even when we see a lot of things like that simulate instruments, we just haven't seen that last little bit added to the puzzle.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think they're already working on that. Is emulating style, just like you can type a prompt into Midjourney that says, create a painting in the style of this artist. You can now probably generate a drum beat in the style of Gene Krupa, or So if it's trained on a certain section of music, or a certain style of music, AI should be able to recreate that style.
Sure.
And the question is, will that the fear of that, will that hamper new musicians in the future, and that their style of the past can be reproduced accurately? There's no need to learn or develop your own specific style.
Yeah, I will say that and I think again this will be part of what our second hour is about. But I can go buy bread, but I make almost all the bread that I eat. And because I like the process. And so I think that there's people who love to play music because they love to play music, and then some of them also might make money with it, but it's the practice that they enjoy. And if they don't, then they should get a LinnDrum. So if they're doing it just to get forward, just to tell the story, that again, if you have an idea and all you want to do is express the idea, then you don't need. I think AI is going to be really popular. Anyway, we're running out of time.
Oh, next topic.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, discuss LiveReacting AI, run in interactive live streams that can be applied to teaching and gaming.
All right. Alex?
I think it just touches on the education opportunities that are there. They're going to be really interesting.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. AI features that will be included in office hours 2030, or what's in JJ's brain?
What's in JJ's brain? Ryan, what do you think?
Couldn't have ended on a better question. And I'm kind of shocked that we went the whole hour without talking a little bit more about exactly how office hours itself is going to be affected by Gen AI. And in some respects, how it already is. We know that when it comes to the way YouTube chapter markers are set up and the time shift that's required, Samuel Nordvik and some others who I'm not appropriately crediting have invested a great deal of effort in building a GPT that they share and that can consistently drive some functionality here. So there's already ways it's being affected and for the better.
Big thanks today to everybody who participated in this show. This has been loads of fun. I kind of love these. Let's look out there and get everybody's ideas on what's going to happen. I think this was a particularly exciting one for me. In closing, thanks to everybody involved in this show every time. We talk about this at the end of every show because it is incredibly important. The producers, those of you who ask questions, put them in, especially today. There were just so many good ideas, and that's true every time we do one of these survey shows. The panelists who come here every day and add their expertise into here, thank you, and everybody else who's appeared in the last week and the last months and the last years. It's been a great time to be exposed to so much brilliant thinking from everybody who comes and volunteers their time here, and to our back-end crew who quietly work behind the scenes every day to make this possible for you wherever you are in the world. Thank you for stopping by office hours. We hope we've added to your day, and we will be back tomorrow doing exactly the same thing. Take care.
I'm waiting for live debates between different AI models. One AI.
It's Claude versus...
Here's the topic. Discuss.
That's what everybody should sound like.
A lot of good ideas. I mean, I don't know how we're going to fit any of this into 8 weeks, but it's there's so many ideas, so it's really good.
I think Monday should be really interesting. I have to be here more often.
Yeah, I think it's going to be popular. So maybe very popular. So it'll be interesting.